The following is a presentation of the Howard County Poetry and Literature Society.
Hello, I'm Reed Whittemore. I have here with me tonight a distinguished translator of American poetry into Russian. His name is Andrei Sergeyev. He has been visiting in America for the first time this month for 2 weeks. He has been, well, he started in New York, and then he was in New Orleans, and two appearances in Illinois, then east to New England, where he saw some small towns, and then Washington, where we met at the Library of Congress yesterday. Mr. Sergeyev has translated many American poets and is an anthologist of sorts of them, and I have many questions that I want to ask him about this very interesting and I think rather unknown work in our country. We frequently think of translators as always translating poems into English, and so this is a backwards arrangement, and one that personally fascinates me, and I have many questions. But first, Andrei, I wish you'd tell us a little bit about what it is to be a translator of people like T.S. Eliot or Edgar Lee Masters into Russian.
Okay. Well, first I must apologize for my poor English, then reply to your question as best I can. The better years of my youth I spent reading Russian poetry. I had some English about me, and when I entered the Moscow Institute of Foreign Languages, I started reading English poetry as extensively. And very soon I found that my favorite poets were those that belonged to the so-called American Renaissance of the beginning of the century, namely Edwin Arlington Robinson, Robert Frost, E. E. Masters, Carl Sandburg, and Vachel Lindsay. And I began translating. I tried my hand first at Sandburg and failed. Each translator thinks that Sandburg is easy to translate, no rhyme, no classic forms, everything is so easy. But later the recognition comes that we cannot translate words. What should be translated is a poem for poem, message for message, form for form. For instance, if we, judging by the practice of Russian School of Translation, if we have to deal with English blank pentameter, it is exactly Russian blank pentameter. For instance, with Frost, when I see birches bent to left and right, across the lines of straighter, darker trees, I'd like to think some boys being swinging them. Когда березы клонятся к земле, среди других деревьев, темных, стройных, мне кажется, что их согнул мальчишка. That's that. In 1955, my first successful translation from Frost was published in a student newspaper. And by 1959, I, for the first time, managed to publish a series of poems by Frost and Sandburg into the foremost magazine of that period, the Novy Mir magazine, headed by a well-known Soviet poet, Alexander Tverdovsky. Then I translated larger portions from Frost and Sandburg, which were included in the broader anthologies of their respective poems. And of late, I translated the whole of Spoon River by Edgar Lee Masters. And at present, Edgar Lee Masters, who deals with spiritual and social problems, workings and drawbacks of democracy, is very much what we need now in our present era of glasnost and perestroika. Why we translate? Because we see something in a different language, that which is absent from the poetry of our language. And we emphasize that difference and not the similarity between the respective diction and the respective poetic visions of the world. And we bring home what is lacking in our household.
I would like to hear, I'd like to hear you recite a Frost poem,
Yes.
or give us a little more of
Yes,
a
a
sample
bit
of that.
in English and a bit in my translation.
Yes, that would be great.
Departmental. An ant on the tablecloth ran into a dormant moth of many times his size. He showed not the least surprise and was off on his duty run when he encounters one of the hive's inquirer squad, whose task is to find out God and the nature of time and space. He puts him onto the case. Мураш, обследуя стол, на мертвую муху набрел. В понятии муравьином она была исполином, но это его не касалось, и он, задержавшись малость, опять заспешил куда-то.
Great. The beat in that doesn't change at all when you move into Russian. Not at all.
Well, the process of translations goes like this. You like a poem. You read it over and over. After, well, a 10th or 100th reading of the poem, in your consciousness there appear Russian substitute for American lines. Sometimes with rhymes, sometimes everything is in there, and your conscious job is to put them together, put those successful lines that translated themselves together into a cohesive poem of the same length. Naturally, if I read the poem on and on, I keep to the meter, which is practically the same, the pattern of rhymes, and all those properties that, along with words that are intranslatable because they have various associations in various languages. Well, just the imagery, the form, and all that parts that constitute the integrity of a poem, the poetic message. So everything must be in there.
Well, now, this is telling me a little bit about why he is your favorite poet. His celebrated remark about free verse was that it was like playing tennis with the net down.
Yes.
Now, you're saying that as a translator, the same thing. That is, what you want are some clearly established rules of the game that you're about to play with the poem. And so long as you can see those rules clearly, then you can try to, as it were, live up to them. It's when you don't have them there that you move into free verse and into that world that Frost thought was dangerous for the poet.
Yes.
Is that right?
With free verse, the situation is different because, to my mind, I represent nobody. I am speaking my own opinion. To my mind, the free verse form or an open form do not exist in the Russian poetic diction. Well, of course, we have what we call free verse, that is, the verse with lines of different length, without rhymes, and of no classical meters. Those poems, the most successful book was written in the beginning of the century by a well-known Acmeist poet, Mikhail Kuzmin. Alexandrian songs, or songs of Alexandria, were not really free because the lines were stuck together so tensely, and words within the line were so tensely put together that one can feel sweat in the armpits. And if it has to do with our younger poets of this day, they try their hand at writing a small poem of short lines with all those formal qualifications of an open form. Still, they are as tense, well, as one would wish them not to be. Because our Russian poets who work in the classical tradition are much more free, feel much more free than those who try to work in the open form. And it is a dream of every translator who deals with an open form or free verse in Russian to bring from elsewhere into our Russian national home the wealth of free verse and open form, with its quality of deep breathing, distances of air between words. The play goes along the same line, observing the same rules. I'd like to read the beginning of the poem by my friend Allen Ginsberg, which is called Sunflower Sutra. Please help me with the first 3 paragraphs.
All righty.
And I'll show you the way I emulate his quality of breathing and air between words. Do please.
Yes. I won't read this very well because I get, as you say, all tensed up. But
do read,
we want
please.
to come back to that. Yes.
Do please.
I walked on the banks of the Tin Can Banana Dock and sat down under the huge shade of a Southern Pacific locomotive to look at the sunset over the Box House hills and cry. Jack Kerouac sat beside me on a busted, rusty iron pole, companion. We thought the same thoughts of the soul, bleak and blue and sad-eyed, surrounded by the gnarled steel roots of trees of machinery. The oily water on the river mirrored by the red sky. Sun sank on top of final Frisco peaks. No fish in that stream, no hermit in those mounts. Just ourselves, roomy-eyed and hungover like old bums on the riverbank, tired and wily.
Сутра подсолнуха. Я бродил по берегу грязной консервной свалки и уселся в огромной тени паровоза Southern Pacific и глядел на закат над домами вверх по горам и плакал. Джек Керуак сидел рядом со мной на ржавой изогнутой балке, друг, и мы, серые и печальные, одинаково размышляли о собственных душах в окружении узловатых железных корней машин. Покрытая нефтью река отражала багровое небо, солнце садилось на последние пики над Фриско. В этих водах ни рыбы, в горах ни отшельника. Только мы, красноглазые и сутулые, словно старые нищие у реки, сидели усталые со своими мыслями. That's that.
It sounds like Ginsberg. I really think it does.
I hope to. Well, as I have said, the fondest dream of a translator is to influence your own poetry by means of bringing to our national home the treasures of your national home.
And you think we might move on from Frost because there he is, the grand old man of of American traditional poetry, although his first book was, quote, discovered by Ezra Pound. And you have ranged so widely among American poets that you really are not just restricted to the American Renaissance that you talk about.
Yes,
you've moved beyond that.
By the nature of my profession, I have to be rather omnivorous. I translated American vanguard, my favorites of the vanguard being T.S. Eliot and E.E. Cummings. And by the way, T.S. Eliot was already published in book form in 1971 in Moscow, in my translations. Unfortunately, at that time, Eliot was considered an ultra-reactionary poet, so the edition was limited to 6,000 copies, which is next to nothing considering the capacities of Russian book market, which is immense. And next year, the best Moscow publisher just considers publishing the collected poems, the standard edition of collected poems by T.S. Eliot in Russian. Just what you are used to, but in Russian version. So I'm to revise my old translations and to add some more, and other translators will collaborate.
Are you able to explain this shift in attitude toward Eliot? Does it indicate something about
it has to
Russia?
to do with our new attitude towards the the whole of world. It's the age of perestroika, which means restructuring, and you thinking about all things on earth, and glasnost, which comes from the Russian term golos, voice, and officially it is translated as openness, and might as well be translated as outspokenness. We are open to influences, we are open to impressions from other literatures, so we are in no danger, we are not to be in any danger of translating the poetry which looks rather alien to Russian tradition. Though with Eliot, especially earlier Eliot, he has some features in common with Russian futurists.
You're thinking of the dislocated.
Yes, I'm thinking of poetic diction.
And the diction.
Poetic diction, yes.
Well, now, how do you handle that? Let us go then, you and I, when the evening is spread out against the sky, all that delicate romantic rhythm, like a patient etherized upon a table. How do you do that in Russian?
I try to imitate that which is in English. Unfortunately, I haven't got the Russian text to prove my words, but well, you might somehow rely on my words.
Do you remember, I grow old, I shall wear the bottoms of my trousers rolled? Do you remember what you did with that?
Я старею, заверну брюки побыстрее.
Now, take that as an example of a translation problem. When trousers were rolled in, 1910, it was a sign of, I guess, being unfashionable for Eliot. They didn't have cuffs on their trousers. But what do you do with that in Moscow? Was that a significant detail of dress in Moscow, or did you have to change it?
No, I haven't changed that idea, but the notion that it's something crazy for an old man to have his trousers rolled is present in those Russian lines.
Mm-hmm.
That notion.
Right. But you know, the reason why Eliot was not popular, at least among many Americans at first, wasn't so much the dislocated verse or the futurism, whatever, as his pessimism or his cynicism. I was reading an old English professor on the subject of Eliot the other day, and he described him as a cynic who would have been much better if he hadn't written in poetry at all. The point being that, after all, poetry should accentuate the positive. It should be affirmative. And he thought poetry, you see, should be inspirational, and he objected to the negativism in Prufrock's world and, of course, the wasteland. Now, wouldn't this have had something to do with the difficulty that the communist regime would have with Eliot? That he failed to accentuate the
Of course,
poetry?
he was pessimistic,
Yes. Yeah.
and in all aspects a negative figure
Yeah.
in the eyes of such a terrible figure as Zhdanov.
Yeah.
But at present, we are not afraid of pessimism.
You're
We
going
just
back.
want true things.
Yeah. You're going back to the old Russian tradition.
Yes.
I can remember the pre-revolutionary admiration of Americans for Russian novelists. They thought they were great because they were real. They had the real thing, and of course a lot of that was nihilism and pessimism and so on.
Yes, yes, yes. We are not afraid any longer of
Yeah.
all foreign influences, whether they are optimistic or pessimistic. And I wonder what this professor should be if he tells us things very much like Mr. Zhdanov. Well, such prescriptions for poetry to be optimistic and inspiring, well, sounds very much like that the poetry should be a set of slogans, which will never do, and was never taken by the Russian reader.
Well, Eliot and Cummings both graduated from Harvard, and of course Cummings was one of the most violently opposed to American sloganism of
He was
any.
opposed to universal sloganism.
Yes, he just hated
I read
slogans,
him a lot.
which may have been one of the reasons you liked him so much.
I like him
think,
for everything. He is just lovely. The quality of beauty. He's so... Well, his poems are nice as squirrels.
Now, he would seem to me to be a real tough nut to translate.
This, of course,
Yeah,
naturally.
no.
I translated a couple of his sonnets, which is an easy
Nice tight form.
problem.
The rhythm is there. Boom,
The
boom.
rhythm
Yeah.
is there, is a pentameter with a strange pattern of rhymes, if any.
Yeah.
A very strange futuristic vocabulary, newly coined words and so on, so I had to invent
Yeah.
the substitutes, something adequate.
Well, you've also mentioned Richard Wilbur, who's a favorite of mine, and
yes.
someone who has.
He's a really fine figure of modern American poetry.
And you know him personally.
Yes, I met him in Moscow, and the other day I met him at Smith.
Ah.
He was present at my lecture there.
Now he's a translator too. I mean,
Yes,
unlike
yes.
Frost, his interest
He told
is.
me of his translations from the French language of Molière. And they say that they were very well produced somewhere in the United States. And the quality of English verse was absolutely beautiful in those translations. So probably he followed the same pattern, the same rules of the game as we do in Russia.
Yes. I believe you regard yourself as a classical translator in this sense, and I think he would. What is a good definition of a translator of this stripe?
Well, there is a Russian tradition of translating poetry which comes from the age of symbolism and was especially successful after the revolution, when many poets went into translation business. That a poem should be swept for a poem, not a word for word. If we translate words, then we have a prosaic translation, which is good as footnotes to the Russian original for those who know Russian a little. The translation is a substitute of the original in another language, which tries to achieve the unattainable ideal which the original presents, but by definition it cannot attain. It can be as close as possible, but never attain the original.
Well, these cultural differences are difficult to get at. And now that you've mentioned female, what about female poets? Have you translated any female poets?
Well, I do my best not to.
Why?
Because to my mind, God created man and woman as two different entities, and the sensitivity of a man is by birth somewhat different from the sensitivity of a woman.
And you don't think that you can translate a woman? Is that what you're saying?
Well, I shrink from it.
Ah.
I rather shrink from it.
I thought you were going to make an
I admire
anti-feminist
women
remark.
poets. I admire women poets. But to my mind, a woman translator will have a better chance to translate them.
I see we're running out of time. And
Really?
so, Andrea, yes, the time has flown here. I want to thank you for being with us
Thank
for
you.
this hour, and I hope that, well, I had such a good time in Moscow that I hope something like that is happening to you here in our
I'm
country.
having a great time in the United States.
Well,
It is so vastly interesting for me.
thank you very much. We have just been listening to Andrei Sergeyev on a subject he knows very well.
To end with, one step backward taken by Robert Frost. Not only sands and gravels were once more on their travels. Не только груды гравия тревога в путь направила, но реки грязи, чавкая, сносили камни тяжкие, крошилось побережье и гибло в тьме кромешной, трещали горы, сблизясь. Я знал, в мои воззрения вселенский вторгся кризис, но, отступив на шаг, я спасся от смятения, пронесся мимо мрак, затихли дождь и ветер, и снова полдень светил.
This has been a presentation of the Howard County Poetry and Literature Society.